A dusty shop bell jangled as Oliver pushed open the door to Lester's lost films and curiosities. The air inside was thick and musty, smelling faintly of old leather and vinegar, the kind of scent only forgotten tapes and faded posters could produce. Rows of shelves crammed with VHS tapes and ancient film reels stretched out in every direction, forming a labyrinth of faded horror memorabilia. "Are you sure this is the place?" Ginny asked, her voice a soft echo in the dimly lit room. Her eyes scanned the shelves, clearly unimpressed, but a little curious. Oliver grinned, undeterred by the overwhelming mess. "This is the only store in town that specializes in banned and underground horror movies. If we're gonna find anything cool, it'll be here." As the three of them ventured further in, something caught Oliver's eye. An unmarked film reel lying in a dusty glass case, as though waiting for them. "Do you see that?" he murmured, his gaze fixed. The reel sat alone, wrapped in brittle cellophane, with a faded tag reading only, "The final cut, do not watch." Alex, the skeptic of the group, laughed it off, dismissing it as a gimmick, but Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something big. Ignoring the "do not watch" label, he persuaded them to bring it home and screen it. Little did they know, the reel had been waiting all these years for a new audience, and once it started, there would be no turning back. Back at Oliver's apartment, the three friends, Oliver, Jenny, and Alex, sat around a portable film projector they dug up from his grandfather's attic. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp in the corner casting long shadows over the walls. The film reel sat in Oliver's hands, its worn and faded cellophane crackling as he unwrapped it. Jenny shivered slightly, hugging her knees. "I don't know, guys. Something feels off. What if it really is dangerous?" Oliver laughed, though a slight chill crept up his spine too. "It's just a movie, an old one at that. Besides, it's probably just another urban legend meant to scare people. Think of it as research for our own horror short." Alex rolled his eyes. "The only thing scary here is the amount of dust on that reel. Let's just watch it already." They loaded the reel into the projector, the film stuttering to life with a faint hum. The opening credits flickered onto the wall in a grainy, sepia-toned sequence. The screen read, "The Final Cut." Underneath the title was a brief note. "Only those ready to see their true selves may proceed." Jenny shifted uncomfortably. "True selves? What does that even mean?" But before anyone could respond, the screen went dark and the first scene faded in. It was a black and white shot of a decrepit, empty theater, the camera panning slowly across rows of empty, dusty seats. A faint whisper, almost too soft to catch, played in the background, and though they couldn't make out the words, the effect was deeply unsettling, like a warning in a language they didn't understand. As the shot held steady on the theater seats, a shape shifted in the darkness, something vague and shadowy, like a person watching them from within the screen itself. Jenny's fingers dug into the couch. Did that shadow just move? Oliver glanced at her with a nervous smile, but his eyes didn't leave the screen. "Relax. It's just a trick of the camera. Probably trying to set the mood." But Jenny wasn't convinced, and neither was Alex, who had gone uncharacteristically quiet. They all stared in rapt silence as the scene transitioned to another setting, a dark forest under a sickly, twisted moon. The camera wove through the trees, shadows darting behind each trunk, as if someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight. The unsettling whispers returned, growing louder, morphing into an almost human sound, a child's laugh, twisted and distorted, echoing around them. The camera shifted, zooming in on a small house nestled within the forest, its windows dark and empty. The screen seemed to flicker, and for a split second, they saw what looked like their own reflection staring back at them in the window of the house on the screen. Alex let out a sharp breath. "Okay, that's not possible. Did you see?" Oliver didn't answer. He could feel his pulse racing, his eyes glued to the screen, unable to look away. The door of the house slowly creaked open, revealing a dark void inside, and the whispering grew louder, forming words that were hauntingly familiar. "Come inside." The voice beckoned, slow and guttural. Each of them felt a strange pull, a magnetic force that seemed to resonate from within the projector, drawing them closer to the screen. It was as if the screen itself were a doorway, something reaching out to them, trying to bridge the gap between their world and whatever nightmare lay within the film. And then it happened. For a brief, gut-wrenching moment, the footage on the screen showed them, sitting there in Oliver's apartment, watching the movie, their faces twisted with horror. Jenny let out a scream, pulling her knees tighter to her chest. "No, that's impossible. This isn't happening. How did it show us?" Oliver tried to laugh it off, but his voice wavered. "It's a trick, a recording overlay or something. Probably an editing trick to make it feel interactive." But his explanation felt empty. Deep down, he knew there was no logical answer. And as the movie continued, the unsettling scenes seemed to grow more intense. Images flashed of places they recognized. A nearby park, the alleyway behind Alex's house, even Jenny's bedroom, all rendered in eerie, dreamlike shades. Suddenly, the film shifted to an unfamiliar scene. A close-up of a young girl with long, stringy hair and hollow eyes stared directly at them, her face pale and expressionless. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, the whispering grew louder, filling their ears, wrapping around them like invisible tendrils. She leaned closer to the screen, as if pressing against it from the other side. Her cracked lips moved, her eyes staring with a sickening intensity. And this time, her words were audible. "You shouldn't have watched this." The projector sputtered, the film reel clicking and stalling as if it, too, were being dragged into some otherworldly realm. Oliver jumped up, his hands fumbling to turn it off, but the projector wouldn't stop. The reel kept spinning, as though powered by a force beyond their control. And then the girl on the screen smiled. It was a slow, unnatural expression, one that seemed to stretch her face in ways that should have been impossible. She pointed directly at them, her voice echoing in a low, haunting whisper that resonated in their bones. "Now you're part of the final cut." The room went pitch dark, the projector shutting off abruptly. For a moment, there was only silence, a thick, pulsing silence that seemed to press down on them from all sides. Alex's phone buzzed, startling them all. He glanced down, his face going pale. It's a picture of us," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Watching the movie, but the background isn't Oliver's apartment. It's that forest." The silence thickened as each of them stared at the phone, the forest from the movie now wrapped around them in the photo, as though they'd been transported there. But it wasn't just a picture. They could hear the whispering start again, faint and growing, as if it were coming from just outside, pulling them deeper into the dark unknown that awaited them. The apartment felt colder than before, shadows gathering in the corners as though the room itself had been touched by the film's sinister energy. Oliver, Jenny, and Alex sat in silence, their minds unable to process what had just happened. It was Jenny who finally broke the silence. "Do you think this is all in our heads?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe," Oliver replied, but he didn't sound convinced. The phone screen showed their image, the three of them sitting in front of the projector, yet the background was unmistakably the twisted forest from the film. No matter how he rationalized it, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had opened something that should have remained shut. They decided to sleep in the same room, afraid to be alone after what they had seen. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw flashes of the girl's eerie smile, the hollow theater, the shadows in the trees. And just before dawn, each of them had the same nightmare, a dream of being pulled through the screen, lost in the endless forest, with something hunting them just out of sight. The next morning, Jenny woke to find scratches on her arm, faint but distinct, as if someone or something had clawed her in the night. Her heart raced, her mind flashing back to the scene with the girl on the screen. She shook Alex and Oliver awake, showing them the marks. "It's just a dream," Alex muttered, though his voice betrayed his fear. But his hands were shaking, and Jenny noticed dark circles under his eyes. As they went about their day, each of them started to notice strange things. Oliver kept hearing the faint hum of a projector, even in the silence of his room. Jenny felt as though she was being watched constantly, every shadow stretching toward her like a hidden threat. Alex saw flashes of the forest in every reflection, brief glimpses that disappeared when he looked closer. They met up again that evening, all shaken, each one secretly wondering if they were slowly losing their minds. But Oliver, Ever the skeptic suggested they confront whatever was happening head-on. "We need to watch it again," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Maybe if we finish the film, it'll stop. Like closing a book." Reluctantly, Jenny and Alex agreed. They set up the projector once more, though none of them could shake the sense of dread that filled the room. As the reel flickered to life, the opening scene played again. The empty theater, the rows of vacant seats, the shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. But this time, the scene was different. They could see their own reflections in the dusty seats, as though they were somehow part of the audience within the movie. And just like before, the whispering began, louder this time, the words clearer. "Why did you come back?" the voice hissed, filling their ears, wrapping around them like a thick fog. The scene shifted to the forest, and this time, the shadows behind the trees weren't just shapes. They were faces, pale, ghostly figures with hollow eyes, staring out at them, mouths open in silent screams. The camera panned, and for a split second, they saw themselves again, wandering through the trees, lost and terrified. Jenny clutched Oliver's arm. "Make it stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please make it stop." But Oliver couldn't move. It was as if he were glued to his seat, the horror on the screen paralyzing him. He couldn't look away, couldn't even blink as the film continued, pulling them deeper into its nightmarish story. And then the girl appeared again, standing in the middle of the forest, her pale face expressionless. She raised a hand, pointing directly at them through the screen, her voice soft and mocking. "You can't escape now. You're part of the story." The projector flickered, and suddenly, they were plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, they weren't in the apartment anymore. They were in the forest. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, twisted and dark, their branches reaching down like skeletal hands. The air was thick with mist, muffling every sound, and a strange silence pressed down on them, broken only by the faint, mocking echo of a child's laughter. "This isn't real," Alex whispered, but his voice shook. "This can't be real." But the scratches on Jenny's arm burned, and the whispers surrounded them, growing louder, overlapping with each other until they formed a cacophony of voices. "Leave, run, you'll never escape." A shadow moved behind a tree, and then another, figures appearing and disappearing in the mist, their faces twisted in agony. Oliver tried to run, but his feet felt heavy, as if the ground itself were holding him in place. Every step he took seemed to sink him deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around him. The girl appeared again, standing on the path ahead of them, her smile wide and unnatural. "You watched it," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Now it watches you." As they stumbled through the forest, they saw flashes of familiar places, their homes, the video store, even the dim light of Oliver's apartment flickering in the distance. But every time they tried to reach them, the paths twisted, leading them back into the heart of the forest. Exhausted and terrified, they realized the truth. They were trapped in the film, part of the cursed story, forever bound to the final cut. Desperation set in, and they began to lose hope, each of them slipping further into madness. They could feel the eyes watching them from every shadow, every twisted branch, and they knew, deep down, that they would never escape. And then, just as they were about to give up, the projector's hum returned, filling the air around them. The forest began to blur, the shapes twisting, until they found themselves back in Oliver's apartment, the projector flickering off in the corner. They were safe, or so they thought, but as they looked around, they realized something was wrong. The apartment was silent, unnaturally so, and when they looked in the mirror, they didn't see their own reflections. They saw the forest stretching out behind them, and the girl, her face smiling from just beyond the glass, whispering, "You can leave, but you'll never be free." As they watched in horror, their own faces in the mirror began to twist, taking on the same hollow, ghostly look as the figures in the film. The curse of the final cut had claimed them, trapping their souls within its nightmarish story, doomed to wander the forest forever, haunting anyone who dared to watch. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, the projector hummed once more, waiting for its next audience, the cursed reel ready to play. A week later, a new group of friends stumbled into Lester's lost films and curiosities. their eyes lighting up as they discovered an unmarked film reel lying in a dusty case. The final cut, one of them read, grinning, "Sounds interesting. Let's watch it tonight." And so the cycle continued, the curse reaching out for new souls, feeding on the fear of all who dared to look beyond the screen.